Hello there, it's great to be back. I am here today with Olumayowa Okediran, a longtime friend, fellow libertarian, very much classical liberal, a radical libertarian, a very strong one ever since I've known him. Olumayowa, great to see you, sir.
It's a pleasure to be here, my brother. How
You
how are
know
you
the
doing, Phumlani?
yeah, I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm good. In short, they call you Mayowa.
Yes, yes, Mayowa is fine. Absolutely.
Yeah, my it's fine. So, bro, you wrote your book in 20, let me just see here. In 2018, you published your book, Navigate a Prospection of Nigeria's Future to 2030. This is the book you last wrote. How do you feel so far? Do you think what you try to predict is on track, or do you think there are things that are missing? How is it going?
Well, I would say that the attempt at uh, analyzing the future of Nigeria wasn't to predict it. It was to anticipate the plausible futures, right? So because it's difficult to say exactly what will happen because there are too many varying factors that influence the future, the goal was to be better prepared for any eventuality. So you would see four different scenarios in the book, and I would say that so far, um, some of the things that were anticipated are beginning to play out. Unfortunately, some of the things that were anticipated included, like the rising level of insecurity in the country. You know, it was also anticipated that the APC government would return to power, and that would come with a lot of uncertainties when it comes to foreign direct investment in the country. Also, with respect to the level of insecurity in the country. Right now, we're seeing a situation where many Nigerians are leaving the country for other countries for greener pastures, as they would say. And that was, we already saw the trend, we already saw the pointers back as far back as 2017, 2018. And I think all of it is sort of hinges on the fact that hope has left. A lot of people are hopeless about the future. They don't see the possibility of Nigeria getting better, at least within their lifetime. And that's a very important thing to take a look at. Most people do not talk about hope. We are always looking at economic indices and unemployment and inflation and all of those. But I think aside from that, the fact that a lot of young people, especially, have lost hope in the country, is something for us to take a look at. And that was one of the questions that was asked in the book. Unfortunately, things seem to be getting worse than it was in 2018. Um, but we need to sort of, those sort of conversations need to come back. How do we bring hope back to the people? How do we address the economic situation, the inflation, the rising inflation, the unemployment in the country, and the insecurity in particular? Those were things that existed in 2018. They still exist now. And in fact, they seem to be getting worse.
Yeah, Mayo, it's very interesting that you've touched on the question of insecurity. And one of my great concerns about Africa at large um, is the lack of security. There are very serious security problems. You have just been speaking about Nigeria. We hear a lot about Christians being massacred in the north, the levels of violence in Nigeria. It's one of, especially the northern side of Nigeria. It's I have felt that the Nigerian government or the state has failed the people of Nigeria, especially the people in the north. Because you see, Mayowa, if people are being brutalized, massacred, terror and all that stuff, there's no security at all. That's a really serious attack on human liberties, on human rights.
Mm.
And would you agree that the Nigerian government has failed its people, especially in the north?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And anyone who says otherwise is just being economical with the throat.
Mm,
Um, the security apparatus that we have in the country, in Nigeria, is mostly about protecting the elite, right? You would find that people who are in power, you just go to Abuja, for example, the number of policemen and military checkpoints and the security apparatus around areas where people who are in power reside is, it's a lot. Whereas when you go to most parts of the country, and this is not only in the north, it's not only the northern part of the country where insecurity is strife. It's in the southern part of the country. It's in the southwest, across the entire country. There has been a rise in the level of insecurity, and of course, the government has failed. One of the primary functions of a government is to protect the lives and property of its citizens, right? And the Nigerian state, the Nigerian government has failed significantly in that regard. Now, this brings me back to the question of hope, right? Because if insecurity is so strife and the government has been unable to find a lasting solution to it, and people have resorted to self-help with vigilante groups all around the country. There have been calls for, and I think, sensible calls for the right to bear arms for private citizens. It shows one thing. It shows that the trust in the government to protect the lives of people and their property is gone. And it's not just only in the north. So definitely, to answer your question directly, the government has failed, and there's absolutely no doubt about that.
Now, let's talk. One of the very big questions, Mayowa. I mean, you've watched Africa for a long time, its politics and what's going on from an economic perspective. And the big questions that people ask is why, that some people ask is why is Africa at the bottom? Why is Africa poor? Why do we have this, poverty? That is worst in comparison to other places or continents around the world. What is your view on that? What do you think is at the core of Africa's economic stagnation or lack of economic prosperity?
I think there are many reasons why why the things are the way they are in many African countries. And a lot of people would want to always blame the West, I think, or blame colonialism or blame slavery. And I think that they do have valuable reasons to say that, right? However, most times I think that we need to take a look inward and not just always blame things that might be out of our immediate control. The many African countries have had their economies mismanaged by the ruling elites, like for decades since independence. And there's hardly any African country that you can take a look at and not see like the very high level of mismanagement by people in governments, in certain instances, military dictatorships, where in many African countries for decades, there are still stolen loots by Abacha that are sitting in foreign countries that every now and then, someone will say, "Oh, we found $200 million sitting in some bank accounts, Nigeria. Here you go." So we've had a situation where the many African countries, or most African countries, have been systematically plundered by the ruling elite for decades after decades, and it's not stopping, right? So there is absolutely no way that you'd expect, growth or prosperity in a country or several countries when the ruling elite are so brazen about how much they loot. The stories are bound everywhere. Hundreds of millions of dollars are pilfered away by these individuals, and it cuts across different age groups. A lot of people will say that let's get young people in power, and that if you get young people in power, things will change. However, we've seen that even young people, when they get into power, do the same. They learn from the playbook of the politicians or the bureaucrats that have been there before them. And a lot of people will say, let's get women in power, and I think that's a good thing. We need to get more women in power in Africa. However, we also see a lot of examples of women who go into power. There's just one trending example in Nigeria at the moment, who get into power, and within 3 months of getting into power, mismanage or steal millions of dollars. So it's a systematic plunder of the continent over time. I think that's the primary reason why Africa is the way it is. There have also been situations where certain countries on the continent have experimented with very obscure, very alien, in my opinion, political, economic philosophies. We have examples in Tanzania with Ujamaa. We have examples all across the continent where there's been a lot of experimentation with political systems or economic systems that have sort of ruined the country. So I think this combination of issues are responsible for the way we are where we are at the moment.
So you are saying that it's mismanagement of the country, it's corruption. Basically, you are pointing to the lack of good governance, right? So that's one element of what you are pointing to. So it's lack of good governance, the mismanagement of the economy, lack of institutions that work, by the way, not just institutions that have been hijacked by the political elite, institutions that work. You're also pointing to economic policy, and that is economic policy has been very much alien, statist, socialist way of thinking that has repressed Africa. Now, what I have observed, Mayowa, is that there is a great deal of, at least in my country, I've observed that there is a great deal of, there's a lot of this idea that the free market capitalism is for white people. It's not an African thing. If you are Black in South Africa, you have to think in a socialist way and rally behind socialist movements and political parties. If you're a pro-market person, you believe in individual liberty, free trade and so on, then you are basically a sellout if you are Black. And you should be following the Black crowd. Don't abandon the socialist movement. How do you think we got, and it's not only in South Africa, by the way, in many other African countries as well, there's the belief that the capitalist system is evil, it's for white people. It was used to cement colonialism and other forms of discrimination, discriminations by the worst. How do we address that at this point?
Yeah, you're right, Phumlani, that this is not just something unique to South Africa. It's across the continent. Whether it's in Nigeria or it's in Ghana, across the continent, this misconception of the free market system, having been alien to the continent of Africa. And thankfully, a lot of work has gone into researching the historical past of several African societies by people like, Dr. George Aite, of blessed memory. I think there's a lot of conflation between, communism and communitarianism, or living in, communities, or, living in societies. And no doubt, many African societies lived in communes, right? In the historical Yoruba system, even till date, we have what we call the Agbole. And Agbole is like it's a collection of homes or families who would farm together, who would do business together, and as a result, would share profits, amongst themselves. Now, that system of communal, communal living in several instances has been conflated with communism. It's not the same thing, right? Because the means of the means of production still resided in, in the hands of private individuals. It just happens that these private individuals, come together, in form of, community to, till the land and share the profit. The conflation is also that people really just they don't understand what free market is, right? It's essentially voluntary exchange. Transactions are made by mutual agreements between buyers and sellers without, force, without coercion. There is a system of, private of price mechanism, right, which is determined by, supply and demand. There is minimal government intervention. There is competition, and all of these ingredients of what makes a free market what it is existed in pre-colonial Africa, right? So you'd go to the farm, you'd till the land, you'd get your grains, and you move from the old oil empire to Ghana to trade without coercion. It wasn't, the means of production was in the hands of private individuals. That's what free market system is, right? It essentially says take away all this unnecessary government, excuse me, all these unnecessary government intrusions, and excuse me, and let private individuals, produce. And when they produce, let them go to the market and sell. And the price of these commodities is dictated by supply and demand. That's free markets, that's free markets, that's free market enterprise, right? And it's not complicated. It also includes private property, and saying that you own your property. It's not owned by the government. You are not a slave. It's not servitude to the state. But you see, when people don't understand this basic premise, they just demonize the concept of free market enterprise and believe it's alien to Africa. It's not alien to Africa. It existed in prehistoric or pre-colonial African societies. There's a lot of correlation between societies that embrace free market enterprise and prosperity, and the data is there. So I think it's important for us to continue to have these conversations, and people who do not totally understand what free markets are, they go back to the basics and basically break it down. I also think that one of the reasons why we have this misunderstanding is because a lot of academics and I'm speaking about like in the situation in Nigeria and many other West African countries, and it might also be the same in Southern and East Africa. But a lot of academics after independence, when many African societies or African countries gained independence, like a lot of academics looked to colonialism and said, since colonialism was about profit making, and since slavery was about profit making, therefore free markets or capitalism or free market enterprise, whatever term is used, is all, and is because that is also about profit making. It's one and the same. Therefore, colonialism and slavery and free markets are brothers of the same family, and that's just not true.
That's not true. Yeah.
And yeah, that's not true. And that narrative has sort of been passed on from one generation of academic to the next generation of academic, and it needs to be addressed.
Yeah. So when you look at African countries, right, the sub-Saharan Africa, are there any countries where you think that these guys, since independence, they may have, to an extent, pursued some pro-market, free market policies, and they seem to have gotten the institutions right. They've been able to stabilize from a political perspective and to really push for development that benefits the people. Are there any countries where you could point to?
So to be clear, I don't think that many African countries just went a lot of them implemented mixed systems, right? We will see elements of free markets policies in Nigeria, as well as we also see protectionist policies as well. It's the same in Ghana. They're always it's a mixed bag of different policies. But one country that stands out as having consistently embraced free market ideals to a certain extent is Botswana. And even though it's a small country, We've seen and it's not just free market ideals, but also like strong institutions. They focused on, implementing strong institutions. They focused on also embracing free market ideas. And even though the country and they've also been able to manage their resources, which I believe is diamond, really well, right? So I think it's important to look to countries like that as examples of how things were done and what can be borrowed from those systems, and just sort of look to what did they do to make them how they are. Like, we hardly hear of any, high levels of insecurity in the country. We hardly hear of any, like all the problems that we are facing in most of West Africa, in Nigeria, in Niger. You don't hear those things from there, right? So it's important to take a look at their playbook and see what can be borrowed.
Yeah, no, I mean those are very interesting comments. Now, let me come back to you. What made you to transform to a free market person? Were you always a free market person, as someone who believes in individual freedom, freer markets, individual liberty? Were you always like that in your high school years, or was there a point in your life where you saw that, you know what, the statist, socialist way of thinking doesn't work? I now, I am pro market. So tell me about that. How did you transform? Because I'm sure young people out there, they could be looking at ways they could transform into pro market sort of thinking or thinkers. Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting question. I didn't set out to, embrace any political philosophy, right? I was mostly interested in governance. And I had questions about, the system of governance in my country, Nigeria. I was concerned about how things were, and I got involved in many youth organizations that were mostly focused on implementing like leadership skills and governance and understanding politics and whatnot. Uh, it was at one of those seminars that I went to, trying to understand how the world works and how politics works in a country, that I stumbled on, the ideas of Frédéric Bastiat. So Frédéric Bastiat was a French parliamentarian who asked a lot of questions and wrote a lot about how he thought legislators or parliamentarians should act, and the pitfalls of wanting to implement a command economy. And so when I read what is seen and what is not by Bastiat, that was the hook. It thoroughly he understood the situation in France at the time, and he had the right answers, in my opinion. And so that was, I would say, the rabbit hole. That was where I got a lot more interested and started to study many other texts by classical liberal thinkers and people who just believed in liberal democracy. And I thought that many of the questions that I had at the time were answered by those individuals, especially Bastiat. I think Bastiat is one person that any young person should read, right? Especially if you want to understand, the art of legislation, why politicians don't seem to get it right, and what politicians should be doing when it comes to lawmaking. Bastiat is a very good read. He thought ahead of his time, and it was, he had all the right answers to many of the questions that I had, and I believe many young people also have these days.
Yeah. So other than this Bastiat guy, the French philosopher you speak of, are there any philosophers of that you admire or that you think did great work in terms of advancing markets over the past, 200 years, 400 years or so? Who else could young people learn about?
Yeah, I think Adam Smith is good. The Wealth of Nations, for example, is a good read, and a lot of people come to understanding these ideas mostly by reading Adam Smith. I will recommend him. I think that for those that are interested in understanding Africa, that Dr. George Ayite, is more recent, but his books, Africa Unchained, for example, delves into how to remove the shackles of colonialism and the shackles. And when it's talking about colonialism, it's also talking about the mindsets, how our mindsets have been shackled by these, philosophies of, alien philosophies, basically. And he also has a book called Defeating Dictators, which talks about what we as young people or advocates for freedom can do on the continent of Africa to ensure that we have true democracy and that our systems are not hijacked by people who believe in like this command economy who just want to dictate to everyone.
Sure. Yeah.
I would recommend books by George Aite. Before he passed, his last work was a textbook, Applied Economics for Africa. And it might seem like, why would I grab a textbook? But you would find that even though it's a textbook and it's available free online for anyone who is interested in studying economics and understanding economics, he delves into, the examples used and the assignments in it for those who are interested in economics are picked from Africa. They are, real life scenarios in Zimbabwe, real life scenarios in Ghana and in Nigeria. And I think it's an ideal book for any young person who wants to really get involved in like understanding economics on their own.
Yeah. So how do you see the future of Africa? Do you think that where are we going in your view? Does it look positive? Is it negative? What can we expect over the next decades or so?
I think that one of the big things to look out for is the steps we've made with regards to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. It's been a long time in the making. It's taken, decades of conversations to get to where we are today. I think looking forward to when it's fully implemented across the continent, that makes me, a lot more bullish about the future of the continent. Because with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, when it's in full swing, we're going to see significant growth across the continent. One thing though that I think that and it's baby steps, right? But one thing that I think that we need to work a lot more on is freedom of movement. Because while the Africa Continental Free Trade Area addresses, doing business across the continent of Africa, making that easier, we still need to have like a framework that allows for people to move across the continent of Africa, to travel across the continent of Africa, much easier. Now it's very expensive, much more expensive to travel from Nigeria to Kenya than to travel from Nigeria to, the UK. And there are many factors that contribute to that. But there are also institutional barriers that are responsible for this high cost. I think we need to address that. I think we're making the right steps in the right directions. The pace is slow, but we're hopeful for increased mobility across the continent, as well as increased trade across the continent. I think if those two things are addressed, and insecurity across the continent, those three things: insecurity, mobility, movement, freedom of movement of Africans across the continent, and trade, the ability for Africans to trade with one another without all these barriers, I think that the continent would do amazing within the next couple of years.
Yeah. So now, I mean, I didn't ask you what you do. What do you do now? What's your job? What are you up to?
For the last decade or thereabout, I've worked mostly with young people across Africa and the world, through Students for Liberty, ensuring that many young people, thousands of young people every year, get the training, access to resources, and opportunities that they need for them to be, advocates of the ideas of liberty. For them to understand the value of liberty, of freedom, and for them to be advocates of the idea. I'm currently Chief of Staff at Students for Liberty, which is the
Chief of
world's
Staff.
largest.
That's a big title there, Chief of Staff. That's top stuff.
It's an opportunity for me to make sure that young people get access to the kind of opportunities that I got access to, and a lot more. They are able to engage with, texts like, Bastiat or Adam Smith. They're able to develop their understanding of, of free markets, of liberty, of, democracy, in certain aspects. And they are able to change their communities by, with these ideas and the resources that, the Students for Liberty is able to give them. So I'm very excited about what I do at the moment, and I know that you've participated in some of our events, and you're part of the community. So
yes, I'm
so
a big
you're
fan.
not an outsider.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Students for Liberty. I mean, yeah, it's been to be associated with it for a while. It's been interesting. We are one community anyway, so we are all free market people, though we may differ in small thing. But for me, those differences are just, it's just small stuff. The key thing here is tolerance and the idea to push for a freer society in Africa that is stronger from an economic perspective. So I mean, yeah, we are one family. So I just think I've always said Africa is an opportunity. If we can get governance right, if we can get the policies right, stay away from communist, socialist dogmas, fix who we are. Look in the mirror. That has been my message. I liked how you spoke when we were starting out, that the problems are within in Africa. We must look within to find them the solutions as well. We can't, Mayowa, keep on blaming colonialism and apartheid. To me, it drives me crazy. I don't like that. And that's what my book is about. Lessons from past heroes. I'm saying, let's look in the mirror, let's learn, put in the right policies, and we are going to do amazing things as people in the continent. So thank you so much. It's great to speak to you.
Thank you very much, Phumlani. It's a pleasure. And I hope to see you really soon, one of these days. In a while.
Very soon, man. I'm sure we'll meet. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure. Thanks, mate.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care.
Cool.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.